The coffin of Iranian military commander Qasem Soleimani arrives in his hometown ahead of his burial. This after thousands flooded the streets of the capital, Tehran, to mourn his death at the hands of the U.S. military. New sexual assault charges are brought against Harvey Weinstein in Los Angeles. On the very same day, the disgraced Hollywood mogul's rape trial began in New York. And in Australia, reserve troops are deployed to battle the country's deadly bushfire crisis. They're racing to take advantage of cooler weather to shore up defenses before an expected heat wave later this week. Hi, and thanks for joining us here in the France 24 newsroom. Glad to have you with us. I'm Claire Besch. After a funeral procession that drew massive crowds in Tehran, the coffin of Qasem Soleimani, Iran's top military commander, has arrived in his hometown of Kerman. Thousands of Iranians have been in mourning since Soleimani was killed by a U.S. drone strike in neighboring Iraq on Friday. The funeral processions were marked by grief, but also by anger, with leaders calling for revenge against the U.S. Joamir Jamin and Cole Stengler have more.
In a mode of prayer led by Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, reduced to tears over Major General Qasem Soleimani. But anger swiftly follows as the chant "Death to America" reverberates through the crowd. Monday began with swaths of supporters accompanying the body of the deceased general from Tehran's airport. The funeral procession then spilling into the streets of the capital, with Soleimani's face plastered to placards, and some mourners calling for revenge, including the late general's daughter, Zainab.
Families of the American soldiers in the Middle East have witnessed America's humiliation in Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Palestine. And they will spend their days waiting for the death of their children.
Following the targeted U.S. drone strike which led to Soleimani's death in Baghdad, American interests in the region are now firmly in the crosshairs of both Iranian and Iraqi officials.
We promise to continue down Martyr Soleimani's path as firmly as before, with the help of God, and in return for his martyrdom, we aim to get rid of America from the region in several steps. God the Almighty has promised to get his revenge, and God is the main avenger. Certainly, actions will be taken.
President Trump, meanwhile, doubled down on his claim that he would target 52 identified Iranian cultural sites if the country's leaders retaliated. The official funeral for Soleimani is set to take place on Tuesday in his hometown of Kerman.
Meanwhile, in the U.S., Democratic presidential candidates are also chiming in with their condemnation of the deadly strike on Soleimani, as our Washington correspondent Ketavan Gorgistani tells us in this report.
The strike on Qasem Soleimani was the first real test on how presidential hopefuls would deal with an international crisis. The Democrats initially seemed united in their condemnation of Soleimani as well as their criticism of Donald Trump's actions. But then over the weekend, on the campaign trail, they were pushed to express their differences on matters of war and peace. The former Vice President Joe Biden reminded his voters of his foreign policy experience, slamming the erratic and incompetent Donald Trump, as he called him. Bernie Sanders, meanwhile, doubled down on his anti-war credentials, reminding voters that he, unlike Biden, had voted against the Iraq War back in 2003, and he also called for a full withdrawal of U.S. military troops from the Middle East. Pete Buttigieg, on the other hand, seemed to compensate his limited foreign policy chops by touting his own military experience and his firsthand knowledge of the consequences of a president's decisions on troops. It was Elizabeth Warren who seemed at least comfortable uncomfortable with the Soleimani strike, initially looking like she was welcoming the death of what she called a murderer before drawing heat from her voters and changing her tone completely to call it an assassination, possibly ordered in order to distract from the impeachment process. But Elizabeth Warren, as well as the other Democratic frontrunners, will have plenty of time to detail their positions next week in the upcoming Democratic debate, with foreign policy expected to finally take center stage.
It's visible from Chile, Argentina, and even outer space, the smoke from Australia's raging bushfires. Reserve troops have now been deployed to tackle the blazes. And while they've been helped by rain and cooler temperatures, officials warn the fires may take off again later this week. Selena Sykes reports.
Homes reduced to ashes. Residents return to Batlow in southeast Australia to find their town in ruins.
The remainder of what was a burning hell yesterday. I don't know what to say about it. It's such a beautiful town.
On the southeast coast in New South Wales state, onlookers watch plumes of smoke fill the sky. Rainfall and a drop in temperatures have brought some relief. But officials warn that the extreme weather conditions are expected to return later in the week.
We can't be complacent. The fire season will last until at least the end of March, and given weather conditions could even be beyond that time. So our focus has to remain on ensuring we contain the fires, we protect life and property. We are not out of danger in New South Wales, and I want to make that clear.
8 million hectares of land have been burned since the bushfires first broke out in September. 3,000 reservists from the Army, Navy and Air Force are being deployed, while Prime Minister Scott Morrison announced extra funds for disaster relief and recovery.
Commonwealth is committing an initial $2 billion over the next 2 calendar years, starting right now, to support all of the efforts of recovery right across the country.
Morrison has been widely criticised for his handling of the crisis and his government's climate change policies.
New sexual assault charges were brought against Harvey Weinstein in Los Angeles this Monday, the very same day he appeared in court in New York for the start of his rape trial. Cole Stengler and Emerald Maxwell have the details of the trial, which has become a focal point of the Me Too movement.
Hobbling into a Manhattan courthouse for a trial watched around the world. Harvey Weinstein is facing charges of rape and predatory sexual assault. While nearly 90 women have accused him of harassment and abuse, the trial focuses on just 2 incidents: an alleged sexual assault of former production assistant Mimi Haley in 2006, and the alleged rape of an anonymous woman in a Manhattan hotel room in 2013. A lawyer representing accusers heralded the kickoff to the trial.
I'm just honored to represent them because they are very courageous. They've agreed to testify under oath. They've agreed to subject themselves to what I'm sure will be a very vigorous cross-examination. And they are doing so because it's in the interest of justice for them to do it.
The trial is expected to last 6 weeks, and if it results in a conviction, could provide a watershed moment for the Me Too movement, which was sparked by the allegations against Weinstein. But the trial also highlights the difficulty of building cases around incidents that took place years ago. Since Me Too began, almost all of the powerful men who have faced accusations have avoided prosecution.
Normally you want, as a prosecutor, they want DNA. They want something firm. They want something that corroborates it. Here, these are really old allegations, and the defense is going to go after that. You look at it from a standpoint, if it wasn't Harvey Weinstein, if it was just somebody, would they even be prosecuting it? And that's an interesting question to look at.
Weinstein maintains that his sexual relationships were consensual and is unlikely to testify. If found guilty, he could face up to life in prison.
There's widespread political confusion in Venezuela centering on this question: who is the president of the National Assembly? Is it opposition leader Juan Guaido or Luis Parra? Parra is insisting that parliamentary rules were followed when he was elected head of the body on Sunday. But Guaido, who was seeking re-election as the Assembly's leader, is calling it a coup. Emerald Maxwell has the details.
Preparing for a possible standoff, Juan Guaido has pledged to preside over a session at the Venezuelan National Assembly after rivals proclaimed a substitute leader.
Yes, we will put ourselves at risk tomorrow. We will put our physical safety at risk. We will do it because lawmakers have strength, because they have morals, values, dignity.
Guaido risks this sort of thing happening again. On Sunday, he was blocked from entering Parliament for what was expected to be his re-election as head of Congress. He even tried to climb over a metal railing to gain access, only to be pushed back by police loyal to President Nicolas Maduro. Inside, the president's allies swore in Luis Parra as the new parliamentary leader. Parra, who was recently banished from the opposition on suspicion of taking bribes, disputes Guaido's version of events.
He didn't want to come. The opposition lawmakers didn't want to be counted. They didn't want to run because they just didn't have the votes, and they obviously had this show staged.
After Parra's swearing in, Guaido held a separate session elsewhere in which 100 of 167 lawmakers backed his bid.
Guaido was re-elected.
The US has reiterated its support for Guaido, who's also recognized as Venezuela's interim leader by a dozen South American countries and the EU. Russia, on the other hand, remains a key backer of socialist Maduro and said it recognized Parra's election as, quote, the result of legitimate democratic procedure.
Here in France, the trial of 24 suspected jihadists began this Monday, just one day before the 5th anniversary of the Charlie Hebdo attack. But only a few suspects are expected to actually appear in court, with the majority presumed dead in Iraq or Syria. Mario Sofos reports.
20 men and 4 women, only 5 of whom will appear in the dock. They're known as the Sevron Network, after the Paris suburb where, at a clandestine mosque, the defendants allegedly became radicalized. Of French, Moroccan, Mauritanian and Algerian nationality, the suspected jihadists are believed to have provided logistical support to the Charlie Hebdo attackers and are also linked to a deadly assault on a Jewish supermarket in Paris 2 days after the attack on the satirical magazine. The parents of Quentin Roy, a suspect reportedly killed in Syria in 2016, are expected to speak as witnesses at the trial on Tuesday.
I know my son. I know who he used to be. He became someone else. Why and how? There are people among the accused who know this. There are witnesses who know. There are people who haven't been called to the stand who know. And there are others out there who know. If it happened to my son, it happened to others, and it's not normal. And we, the parents, have nothing to do with that.
The suspects were aged between 20 to 30 years when they left France just before the January 2015 attacks. Some are believed to have been swayed by the Islamic State armed group's declaration of a self-proclaimed caliphate in June 2014. Most of them were reportedly killed in bombings or suicide attacks while fighting for the terrorist group in Syria or Iraq. The court requisitions are scheduled for Thursday, January the 16th, while the verdicts are set to be heard on Friday the 17th.
Moving on, we wrap up this bulletin in Bulgaria with images of a rather frigid Epiphany. Orthodox Christians there have marked the holiday, which falls on the 12th day after Christmas and commemorates the baptism of Jesus. According to local tradition, a priest throws a cross into the water and men race to retrieve it. And it's believed that the first one to get the cross will be blessed with good health in the new year. Well, may you all have a healthy, happy new year as well. Thanks for joining us here on the program. Do stay tuned to France 24.